This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. Did you hear the news? Following in the path of Bruce Jenner, the Title IX law is transitioning in its 50s. If President Joe Biden gets his way and a new round of regulations survives the legal challenges to come, Title IX will grow a penis. The 1972 law was created to give women on college campuses equal access to athletic scholarships. Back then, those were dominated by the men's teams. But there's also a reason why, when Title IX was passed, they didn't just offer more scholarships for the men's team. We could talk about men being bigger and stronger and faster, and on the whole, that's all true. But at a more basic level, they knew in the 70s what we struggle with today. Men and women are different. It's okay to say it. It's okay to admit it. No one's going to cancel us for saying this basic truth. Male and female, he created them. And male and female, they competed separately. It was a good system, all told. But the new regulations threaten all that. Not that you would know it from reading the Associated Press story. Per AP style, reporter Colin Binkley denies in the headline what he admits in the body of the story. The AP knows that the public is mostly illiterate, especially to the tactics and techniques of a slanted story. So for the AP, the whole game is the headline. Most people won't go past it. So the AP's headline reads, "New Title IX rules protect LGBT students, but avoid addressing transgender athletes." That, of course, is a lie. Deeper into the story, where few of our fellow citizens dare to tread, Colin Binkley finally tells the real truth. He writes, "The 1972 law doesn't directly address the issue, but the new rules clarify that Title IX also forbids discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. LGBT students who face discrimination will be entitled to a response from their school under Title IX. Those failed by their schools can seek recourse from the federal government." End quote. You see what they did there? What is transgenderism if not a matter of gender identity? What is gender if not a matter of how you view yourself, regardless of what the facts may be? So let's run through a scenario. New Title IX rules forbid discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Got it. No one this century has been denied a chance to compete based on their sexual orientation. That's never been a thing. That's probably never happened, perhaps in the history of sports. But now it's all outlawed. Good stuff. It's the gender identity piece that really matters. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that there's a swimmer on the University of Pennsylvania men's team. Let's call him Bill. Bill was good enough to compete in college, but never provided much competition. He was an also swam. Just another guy in the pool, oftentimes going home without placing. Then one day, several years in, Bill gets a taste for gold. Except there's no honest way to earn it. If he took performance enhancers, they would be found out. What's a man to do, coming to the end of his days in competition? Does he hire Michael Phelps as a coach? Does he work harder? Does he study the sport somehow? No. He transitions. He says he's a woman now, and we are all told to take his word for it. Bill starts calling himself Leah, and by social custom, all around him must now partake in that lie. We are told that lives and even civilizations themselves end when confused men are misgendered or dead named and called by the sex they were born and the name their mothers gave them. We can't have that. Before you know it, every institution has upturned itself to suit Bill's delusions. The swim team accommodates him. So does the athletic department. Their official position to people who complain is shut up and swim. But let's say some wise soul in the administration, perhaps someone who realizes that history did not begin in 2023. Let's say that person decides not to take Bill's word for it. He says, "Hey, Bill, you're welcome to a spot on the men's team. You're welcome to go on as a student. We'll even call you Leah. But there's no way in hell you're getting in that pool with those girls." What would happen to such a person? What would happen to that brave soul? What would happen to the last American willing to speak the truth that we've all known since birth? The truth that's been given to us since Genesis 1. Male and female, he created them. First, the press would pile on. Look how the Detroit News portrayed Riley Gaines when she was announced as the commencement speaker at Adrian College. Not in neutral terms, not as a a former swimmer turned advocate for women's sports. No, she was portrayed as an anti-trans bigot, as a starling dog barring the door to keep the Ruby Bridges of his time, Bill Leah Thomas, out of the swimming pool. The AP would portray such an administrator as a modern-day Bull Connor. His statements would be the modern-day fire hose. Bill would then file a Title IX complaint, and now the university would have all the ammunition it needs. If it couldn't somehow get rid of the administrator for being a bigot, or for standing on the wrong side of history, they'll damn sure get rid of him for bringing legal liability to the university. Between reputational damage and problems with federal regulators, the leaders of the university wouldn't have a choice but to let that president go. The administrator in this example was a brave soul. Most of you listening probably did go to college. Does that sound like anyone you knew? Does that sound like anyone you've heard of since, at your school or any other school? No, right? States like Florida and Oklahoma have already said they won't comply with the Biden order, that they will protect girls and women's privacy in the bathroom, and they will protect the sanctity of women's sports. There will no doubt be legal challenges. Some of the strongest challenges should come from Congress. Did you notice the lack of headlines about how Congress is updating Title IX? That's because Congress has done no such thing. This is the administrative state running the country. So many decades ago, the politicians we send to Congress decided it was more fun to play congressmen on TV. They love doing media hits. They love attending fundraisers. And they especially love hitting a fundraiser after a media hit. They love acting. They love preening for the cameras. They love when their neighbors and their friends and even their rivals of the past have to come crawling to ask for their help. But they hate the actual work of lawmaking. It's kind of boring, and it's very hard building consensus. In Washington, you have two parties. You have Democrats and Republicans. Then you have two chambers, the House and the Senate. And sometimes the chambers can be as different as the parties are. Even if you can get enough of all those people to agree, then the president still has to sign it. That's a lot of work, and after all, you're only one man. So what do? Do you buck the system and search for meaning? Or do you go along and get along and let the agencies write and rewrite rules for themselves, like is happening with Title IX? It's an easier life pretending, and that's why little of the news you read in Washington actually comes out of Congress. The president runs the country, and so almost every government employee works for the executive branch and under the chief executive. In theory, the president runs the agencies, but lately it feels like the agencies run themselves. Sometimes the agencies might overreach a bit, and a few people in Congress will talk tough about oversight, but for the most part, everybody likes things the way they are. Republicans in Congress might try to slow the regulations down by arguing that certain things are only for Congress to decide. But even when that happens, the administrative state is always working, mostly behind the scenes, to remake America in its image, with little input from the people who represent us, and no input from us, directly, the people that this stuff would affect. And so what draws heat today could be reintroduced in a year with little notice. The American attention span is not set up for prolonged battles. Not in Congress, not in the media, and not when we sit down to watch the TV news. And so if Biden gets his way, Title IX will turn trans. Not because an Overton window has moved in America, but because his supporters wish it were so. And now they will it to be so. And they don't care who objects. This is lawmaking without lawmakers. This is brute force. And the sick thing of it is, the more you and I whine about it, the happier the regulators get. That's how they know it's working. And so my question now is, how loud will we get? We've seen Riley Gaines put her neck on the line to speak the truth. We've seen how she's been portrayed for doing it. How many men are going to join her? Or will we leave the women in our lives and around the country and the few brave souls like Riley Gaines to fight this battle for themselves? As I look around my life, I find that it's the women who are fighting the hardest. I think of Patriot Post girl Heather Dow. I think of Anna Hoffman, a friend of the program. I think of Tiffany Justice, a co-founder of Moms for Liberty. And so my question for the men listening is the same question God had after the fall in Genesis 3. Adam, where are you? Men, where are you? How and when and where did we get separated from the truth? At some point, our kindness was turned around and it was taken for a weakness. And our willingness to play along with people who were in actual confusion was taken as a waving of the white flag, that we'd given up on the truth entirely. It's time now to move the line back. That starts by being honest with women, and that starts by being honest with ourselves. It begins at the beginning. Male and female, he created them. Men and women are different, and that's okay. It's not only okay, it's how we're designed. It's a feature, not a bug. Sameness is a particular curse of our times. No other people in human history were burdened with the idea that things should be equal, because they never had been. The third person in the Bible killed the fourth person. There have always been differences between people, and envies born of those differences. It was always this way. There are no good old days. Somebody always ate first, and somebody always ate last. Life was never fair. I'm always fascinated when I see a very young child say, "That's not fair." I always wonder, where did they get that word from? Who exactly told them that things would be fair? How did that idea take root in a young mind? Think about it. Fairness is not innate to the human condition. And so any circumstance of fairness that a kid has ever known was made fair by adults. Maybe that's the invisible hand that the kid can't see. You don't quite pick up on everything when you're a kid. But fairness is a created condition, and it's created by adults who don't want any kid to feel left out. As well they should not. But from that moment on, from the first hit, which is free, then that word fair gets tossed around by young people as if it's something that actually exists. The world we've built in 2024 is as free and fair as could be. It's as free and fair as any group of humans has ever known on this planet. And what do people do with that freedom? What do people do with this era of fairness? Do they do the things their ancestors maybe could not because they weren't allowed? No. They go panning for microaggressions. They seek out scenarios of victimhood. They're not strong or empowered, as we've been told. They take an historically free and fair time and pretend that they face the discriminations of the past. They hustle backwards. 100 years ago, it was feminists demanding entry into all men's spaces. As recently as 2018, feminists were giving us thought experiments about how safe the world would be if men just had an 8 p.m. curfew. Women cheered as Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court opportunity was threatened with obviously fake allegations. We were told to believe all women. And when it came to the curfews, men were told to take this seriously. Ignore the obvious stupidity of the idea and instead ask yourself why women would want this in the first place and why they would feel safer without us. In just 5 years, the mighty have fallen. Women went from all-powerful, numbers too big to ignore, the future is female, the future of everything, to being unable to keep men out of their bathrooms, their competitive pools, or the top of their medal stands. Will Thomas's Wang was the end of feminism as we've known it. It's a man's world, and in 2024 it still is. You can thank the feminists for that. A few weeks ago we told you that Gretchen Whitmer was running for president. We're the first to do so in Michigan because we're the only people allowed to do so. But after her appearance at the NFL draft, I'll tell you what the Michigan media also will not tell you. She's stumbling. Whitmer's rise owes not to her oratory or to her policy, but rather to Trump's insult, that woman from Michigan, and the attentions of a captive audience. 2020 was a dark time. We turned the Tiger King into must-see TV. The draft was a rare Whitmer appearance outside of her safe space. Whether she's in Lansing or at an appearance, Whitmer is usually the one dealing the cards. The press acts as her stenographer, they write a headline in her voice, and everybody moves on. But the NFL draft is bigger than Big Gretch, and on that stage, before a wide assortment of Michiganders, we saw a window into the true Gretch. Whitmer was in friendly territory. The NFL draft was held in Detroit, one of the most democratic cities in America. If that weren't enough, she was dressed to pander, wearing Cartier glasses. In Detroit, they're known as buffs, and it's buffs that turned a boring Ingham County woman into Big Gretch. Whitmer was in friendly territory. The NFL draft was held in Detroit, one of the most democratic cities in America. If that weren't enough, she was dressed to pander, wearing Cartier glasses. In Detroit, they're known as buffs. It's buffs that turned a boring woman from Ingham County into Big Gretch. So not only was Whitmer in friendly territory, and not only was she wearing buffs, she came bearing good news. Detroit had set the NFL draft attendance record. Over 3 days, some 700,000 people had come out to hear men's names read aloud. Believe it or not, with those kind of numbers, there's actually no football played at the draft. It's only discussed. And yet, in the most favorable circumstance imaginable, Whitmer was booed audibly. Naturally, the Detroit News never mentions it. They do have 2 stories that make mention of the appearance, but neither mentions the boos. How did we get to this point, exactly? Why is Michigan's best newspaper no longer telling true stories? If you watch Whitmer's appearance at the draft, if you see the video, you see her have to talk louder because the boos were so loud. If you read about it on Outkick, if you read about it on The Enjoyer, you read about the boos because that's what actually happened. But in the pages of the Detroit News, the Emperor's new pantsuit is stunning and brave. I have one request for my old colleagues. Report on what happened. Make the news true again. Report on what happened without fear of pushback and without favor for the people you're covering. It could all be so simple. One last thing. Happiness is based on expectations. Detroit learned this the hard way in April. When the Detroit sign was posted on I-94, it was widely roasted. You guys saw me, I grabbed a pitchfork myself. We were promised a Hollywood-style sign, and what we got was the product of clip art in a 3D printer. Much humor resulted, including a parody song by G. Matt Cash and several other handmade road signs in Detroit. I've seen signs for Warren and Redford and Ypsi and even New Baltimore, and they're funny every single damn time. But now that we've had some time with these signs, and now that our out-of-town guests have departed, here's what I think. If you just woke up one day and drove I-94 and the Detroit sign was there, randomly, you'd be happy. You'd appreciate the effort. You might even run back to take a picture of it and post it to social media. You would take pride that Detroit was taking pride in itself. You'd say, finally. Because you had no expectations, you'd be pleasantly surprised. You certainly don't expect that anyone in Detroit would do something for you, a Detroiter. And so if that Detroit sign were posted one random day, you might say, cool. But then you might wonder what the special occasion was. This is what happens when a spouse has been conditioned to not expect nice things. Anything nice they see, they figure it must be for someone else. Which, in this case, it actually was. I'd love for us to fix that local defect in our character. Someday I would love to wake up and find that we've done something for us. And someday I'd love to not be surprised by that. But the word Hollywood sign brought with it a certain set of expectations. The Hollywood sign is big and grand. The Detroit letters would have needed to be as big as the Uniroyal tire to even come close. And so 8-foot tall letters were doomed to fall short of expectations. Let's put this in culinary terms. You go to a restaurant, you sit down and you order a Coke. The waiter brings you a sweet tea and you spit it out. In its own right, sweet tea is a fine drink. Delicious even. Refreshing on a hot day. But when you've ordered a Coke, sweet tea is the worst drink you've ever had. Happiness is based on expectations. In the final analysis, the Detroit sign is just fine. But next time, Detroit's town fathers should underpromise and overdeliver. Next time Detroit does something big, it should actually be big. And next time Detroit does something big, it should actually be for Detroiters. Here on the Enjoyer Podcast, we are so happy to have Riley Gaines with us here today. Riley Gaines is best known as an NCAA swimmer, best known as an advocate for women's sports. And as we were saying just before we got on, Riley and I actually should not be having this conversation. This stuff is all such common sense to us that it hardly feels like it needs to be said, but apparently it does. Apparently the times are so unusual that we do need to speak up for the normal vision of things, for the idea of women's sports that's existed as long as there's been women and as long as there's been sports. And so that's what we're going to do today. Riley Gaines, thank you so much for taking the time. How would you describe yourself? Who is Riley Gaines? what would you have the world know about you? What would you have the world know about why you've chosen to speak up? Like, what would motivate a person to do all these things?
Well, I like this question because I'm very often painted as something that I'm not. But who I am, look, first and foremost, I'm a Christian. Before anything, I try to live a Christ like life. I believe that's why we are here on this earth, is to spread His word, His message, His gospel. And I wholeheartedly am certain in the fact that I am doing that and saying that He created male and female perfect in His image, intentionally in His image. So, first and foremost, I'm a Christian. Secondly, I'm an athlete. I have been, obviously, my whole life, competed collegiately, did all the Olympic things like that, have some accolades that I finished my career with that I will forever be proud of. I come from a family of athletes. My dad, he's an SEC football player. He went on to play professionally. My mom, she played Division I softball. My oldest sister played softball. She went to Ole Miss. My brother's in college playing football now. My youngest sister, she's an elite level gymnast. So playing sports is something that is a very big part of me and who I am. I'm a woman, if you couldn't tell. I mean, these identity politics that we see, the left, of course, both sides are playing on this, but the left use over the past couple years. I never would have imagined we would have gotten to a place where the side that once claimed to champion and fight and advocate for women would now be the same party who is really behind the erasure of what it means to be a woman, and certainly the erasure of our sex-based protections and our sex-based rights. As I said, these articles that you see, they label me as anti-trans, they label me as transphobic, but allow me to be very clear here. The stand that I have taken, I'm standing for something rather than against anything. I'm not standing against people who identify as trans. No, but I am standing for women. My argument is pro-fairness. It is pro-safety, pro-privacy, pro-transparency, pro-common sense, pro-science, pro-reality. It's pro-woman, which I think just begs the question, why is it that being pro-woman is immediately deemed anti-trans? And if that's the case, okay, then wouldn't being pro-trans inherently be anti-woman?
Right.
And what do we call someone who's anti-woman?
Right.
We call them a misogynist. So here I am now in 2024 fighting for women's rights.
It's a wild time. I mean, and one of the things that got me crossways, I used to be a columnist at the Detroit News, is their coverage. When they announced that you were coming, and I know the woman who wrote the piece, Kim Kozlowski, I know she's a feminist. And what shocks me about the way that story was portrayed is that you were an enemy of inclusion, as if the point of women's sports is not that it's an exclusive thing for women. And so they flipped 50 years of history just on its head and just on a whim decide that your position is the wrong position. I'm sure you've seen other articles and that article. On the whole, when you think about how coverage of this announcement was handled, when you think about how coverage of yourself is handled in general, what would you say, having been a target of the media, how fairly and how accurately have you been covered? Have people tried to understand where you're coming from?
I knew media bias existed, but I did not realize to the extent of which it does. Even this week, the National Organization of Women, now, I mean, the leading feminist, air quotes there, the leading feminist organization for the past, 60-ish years, 60, 70 years, they released a piece, they published a piece, and this piece said that I was a white supremacist patriarchist. I don't even know what that means. So look, they will twist and they will turn, as you said, put words in your mouth, and they'll do it using words like empathy or compassion or inclusion, which in their true essence are all wonderful things, especially as a woman, to be compassionate, to be empathetic. That's what makes us great mothers. That's what makes us great wives and sisters and daughters. But to your point, it is not inclusive to ask us to smile and step aside and allow men onto our podiums. No, that is exclusive. And it's exclusive to the very female athletes who Title IX, or the women's sporting category, was created to protect. And it's not compassionate to ask a young girl to take off her clothes, undress next to a fully grown, fully intact man, exposing himself inches away from where she's undressed. That is not what compassion is. So, what I call this is language contamination. They have taken the words that we use, even words like woman, that we've never struggled to understand, never struggled to define, and they've twisted them entirely. All that to say, the media is brutal, but what I say to them is bring it on. Bring it on. I am so secure in my stance. I'm so secure with myself. I'm so secure in my faith. All of those things give me the strength and the wisdom and the guidance and protection and discernment to be able to stand firm. I think more people than not, actually, I'm certain every Gallup poll shows it. I think most recently, almost 80%, which I believe the number would be higher now, of everyday Americans agree that it's wrong and it's harmful, the gender ideology movement as a whole. So when these media outlets expose themselves in the way that they're doing, they're really only alienating people.
Where have all the feminists gone? Why aren't they out there with you? Why are they against you? I just, from a selfishness perspective, right? If you have this thing, this feminist critique of society that puts you on a path to saying there should be a woman in every room where a big decision is being made, and people buy that. Feminism was going well 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Women were talking about we needed curfews for men. How did we get to the point where you're talking curfews on one hand, and now you can't even keep a guy out of your locker rooms and bathrooms? Where are the feminists right now? Why aren't they with you?
Not only can we not keep them out, these men are being celebrated for entering into our locker rooms. And it is the feminists who are celebrating them. I say that broadly. There are some feminist groups who have been amazing on this issue and who have stuck to their original intent of fighting for women. So super left-leaning, liberal, radical groups, but who have become great allies of mine. WDI is one. Wolf, Women's Liberation Front, that's another one. Those have been phenomenal feminist groups. But as I said, you have the National Organization of Women who have been worse than just neutral. You have people like, or groups like the National Women's Law Center who strictly litigates on issues that impact women. Okay. And I was testifying before Congress most recently, and the woman sitting next to me was the president of the National Women's Law Center. And in her opening testimony, she said that women should just learn how to lose more gracefully to men. You have people like Billie Jean King. This is who we have to accredit Title IX to. She played in the Battle of the Sexes and she won, and it was this huge feat for women, and it propagated us forward, of course, in sports, but in our career paths and our personal relationships. She is now actively fighting for male inclusion in women's sports and women's spaces. So what these women are doing, especially these athletes like Dawn Staley or Megan Rapinoe or Sue Bird or Billie Jean King, what they're doing is pulling up the ladder behind them, which is tragic. It's a classic case of virtue signaling.
Riley, you're going to be speaking at Adrian College, commencement class of 2024. Your life has changed quite a bit since you left college. You've had to be brave. You've had to speak up. You've alluded to this alternate reality where you're a dentist. You're a dental student. It's a quiet life, and it's a much different life. What's going to be your message for the class of 2024?
Well, first of all, I could not be more excited to get in front of a group of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed students who are about to enter into this next big stage of their life that, of course, comes with excitement, but also challenges. And I know better than anyone what this looks like, what this transition really looks like. So what I'll be speaking about, I want to speak to the importance of courage, being courageous, being tenacious. I mean, it's the most admirable trait and characteristic is courage. So speaking to that, I want to be able to speak to faith. As I mentioned, this is central in all that I do. President Docking, the president of Adrian College, he is amazing. He is hands down one of the best college presidents at any college in the United States. Faith is certainly central to him. It's very obvious it's central to what they're doing. He's been someone who's not backing down, despite the media coverage, despite the articles that come out now about both me and him. He's expressed to me, look, we are excited to have you here. We don't care what sort of opposition we face. Bring it on. So speaking to faith, and then finally speaking to freedom and the importance of freedom, how it is our foundation as a nation that has led us to be the strong country that we have been for nearly 250 years now. Letting the students, I guess, just expressing, look, your time is now. Unleash your skills, your knowledge, your talents, and make a difference. I think it's easy to get caught up in this belief that one person doesn't have the ability or the power to make change. Could not be further from the truth. These college students are faced with, like I said, many challenges ahead of them, but they have the power to make change. It's up to us to do it.
Sometimes people misread the activism of the past and they portray them as, oh my God, my grandparents did this for me and they created a better future. And what we forget is that they were fighting for a better here and now for themselves. What would you have these young people know about the need to be brave and perhaps the costs of bravery? It sounds like you've really leaned into it, but I'm sure there was a moment in life when it could have gone either way. You could have just gone about your life, or you could have spoke up like you did. Was it worth it? What would you have someone know about why it was worth it?
100 times out of 100 times, it's worth it. As I said, I'm speaking to biblical truth. I'm speaking to objective truth. I'm speaking to biological reality. And those things always prevail, truth and sanity. So we've never looked unkindly upon someone who defends women, defends children, defends parental rights. That's what we're doing here. And so 100 times out of 100 times, it's worth it. The backlash that we face for merely saying there are two sexes, right? It's name calling. It's petty personal attacks. I mean, that's the extent of it. But the support that I receive, which everyone might not see, but I do, tenfold anything negative. That's why we do it. I'm fighting for girls like my younger sister. That's what this is about.
You've taken your fight to another forum, the courtroom. You have some Title IX action going on. The Biden administration just promoted some new rules that essentially leave open a back door where the federal government would then be a bludgeon to be used against schools who didn't let a Leah Thomas situation happen. What do you think about Title IX in 2072? Will Title IX still be here and still be helping give girls opportunities on college campuses?
As it stands now, Title IX as we knew it has been abolished. What the Biden administration has done in terms of rewriting Title IX entirely, equating sex with gender identity, this is the most anti-woman, anti-reality pursuit we have seen from this administration thus far. The original Title IX, implemented in 1972, was only 37 words, with one word being activity, that ultimately gave Title IX its most notable byproduct, which is allowing equal opportunity in sports. The Biden administration has now, their new proposal, their new rewrite is 1,577 pages out of 37 words. It's abysmal. It's asinine what they've done. But you asked me what I expect for the future. I'm hoping in November we get a new administration in the White House who quickly reverses course, because make no mistake, what the Biden administration has done is an illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX. I hope in the meantime, Congress introduces a CRA, a Congressional Review Act. They're getting hit with litigation. Title IX became published as of, I believe, April 29th, the morning of April 29th. They're going to be hit with lawsuits out the yin yang. So, but that's what we need to see. That's how we reverse course. So proud to be a part of some of those. We've got several different attorney generals of different states. Not yours. Your attorney general is evil in Michigan.
I'm sure Dana Nessel is all for this stuff. Not because she's thought it through, but because she's been told that's what your position will be. Riley, where can people find you? What's your name on Twitter? Where can people find Riley Gaines, and how can they support your journey?
You can find me on Twitter. My username is Riley_Gaines_. My Instagram is Riley G. Barker. I got married amidst all of this. And so it's been a wild ride. But it's nice having that almost like alter ego, Riley Barker. I can flip on Riley Gaines, turn her off, but Riley Barker is when I'm at home with my deer on my wall, my elk behind me. That's Riley Barker.
So in a way, you get to experience that alternate universe.
Oh, for sure.
Right. The Riley Gaines is going to speak at Adrian College, but Riley Barker is going to return home.
That's the truth.
Yeah. Well, Riley, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Be blessed, and don't be a stranger.